Testing. Hello, volume up. Can you hear? How are you? Okay.
Positive on the budget review completing ahead of schedule.
You running tomorrow? If everyone could grab their seats. Hello, good morning. Okay, if everyone could grab their seats, it's 5 after 10. We're here programmed to be here till 2. And I'll make this very quick. I'm Jim Keene. I'm Palo Alto City Manager. I'm mostly here to introduce my bosses, the mayor and city council members. But just before I do that, this is such an appropriate kind of setting this morning. I noticed that across the way there's a sign that there is a marriage class over here. And here we have a separations discussion that we're going to have going on. So we've got everything covered today. Anyway, I'm going to turn this over to Mayor Greg Scharf and the chair also ultimately of our rail committee, Tom Du Bois, is here. Adrian Fine, city council member, also on the rail committee, and council member Liz Niss is here. We've got, I see at least one former mayor back in the back, Pat Burt, who was actively involved in this work when he was on the council and still is as a citizen, as so many of you are. And our planning director, Hillary Gittleman, is up here at the front. So, Mr. Mayor, turn it over to you, sir.
Thanks. So thank you so much for coming out today. It's so great to see all of you on such a nice day. So we're here because we have an opportunity to address the rail crossings. With the passage of Measure B, there's now $670 million that is going to be distributed between us, Mountain View, and Sunnyvale. And so we have to begin the process about thinking about what we want this to look like and what we want to do as a community. And obviously we face a lot of challenges. I mean, with electrification of Caltrain and possibly high-speed rail, you could end up with trains running every 6 minutes, how that looks at east-west connectivity, how do we get across the railroad tracks, what as a community do we want this to look like. And so we're starting the process with an open mind and inviting all of you to come here and start giving our thoughts as we move through this process. At the end of the day, what we need to do is define a set of improvements that we would want to make at each rail crossing, assuming we want to make improvements at the rail crossing. I mean, I wouldn't even start with that we have to do that. So that's really where we are on this. I think the process starts today. There's going to be many of these workshops. It's going to be a long process. But on the other hand, there is some urgency. It takes a while to get this done. Other communities, frankly, are quite further ahead than we are in terms of defining what they are. VTA has said it's not going to be first come and using the money, but frankly, I'm always concerned that if we drag on forever, other communities will use up the money, and we won't get an opportunity to do so. So while I think community engagement is why we're here and all that, at the end of the day, I do think we need to come up with a plan and move forward with that. I also wanted to say that, getting people involved in the process and sticking with it is really important because it's, you want everyone to sort of move through the process and be committed as we go through it. We'll be using social media, the web, other avenues of communication to engage and allow the broad community involvement for those who aren't able to attend. And so today really is primarily focused on understanding the challenges and confirming the problems we need to address. And that's really the critical step in building consensus around what we want to do as a community. And with that, I'll introduce the chair of the Rail Committee, Tom Du Bois. Oh, you're not next?
I think Steve or Scott's going to go.
Oh, Scott's next. All right. Come on up, Scott.
Thanks, Greg. Hi, everybody. I'm Scott Steinwert. I'll be basically your MC all day long. Just so everybody knows, we're going to spend about the next 4 hours together. Before we get started, just a couple of logistics. So everybody knows, the restrooms are important information here. Restrooms are through this door right here. Feel for any time you need, go right through there. exits. You came in right there, exit here, exit back at that corner as well, and right here if we need to evacuate for any reason. Hopefully we won't. Yeah, so you can see the agenda up on the screen. There are agendas on your table as well. This day is broken into two main sessions. The morning session we're going to start here involves doing a couple of presentations. We'll break for lunch, have a quick bite, get back into the tables. In the afternoon, we'll do some work at our tables, as Greg said, defining and confirming that we clearly understand the challenges and problems at the various grade crossings, and then working on defining some goals for the projects that we may develop. We know that this has been studied for a long time, so it may feel like we're stepping back a little bit. That's important in a process like this to make sure we have a solid foundation, understanding the challenges and problems. We have broad consensus about that as we start to evaluate and develop alternatives. So don't be worried. All the great ideas that have been developed in the past, we'll bring all those forward, evaluate them. Today is really to make sure we have a solid foundation as we go through the next several months and looking at alternatives and developing those. So as Greg said, the next step here in terms of the process, we're going to have Rail Committee Chairman Tom Du Bois give some background information, and then we'll have a presentation from Josh Mello from the city on a visual survey going through each of the grade crossing locations, and that'll be followed by Chris Metzger, who will talk about the circulation study and data collection that's going on right now in the city. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tom.
Great, thanks. Looks like a great turnout today. If anybody's still looking for seats, there's a few down front. So I am the chair of the Rail Committee this year. I'm also our representative to Caltrain. Greg pointed out the council members. On the Rail Committee, we have 4 council members. Adrian Fine, Eric Filseth, who couldn't be here this morning because of a family emergency, our mayor, Greg Scharf, and myself. Are you going to flip for me, or should I? Okay, yeah, go ahead to the next one. So I did want to say thanks to everyone for being here. You are here on what's an important day in Palo Alto history. This has the potential probably to be the most transformative change in our city, perhaps ever. The rail line goes the entire length of the city, and how we change it's going to impact nearly everybody who lives and works here. Go ahead. So Palo Alto faced another transformative change back in 1962, and the question was what to do with Oregon Avenue. It was a nice two-lane road. It was full of traffic. The county proposed removing 107 homes and running chain link fences down the length of the avenue with only two connecting streets. And so there were clearly positives in widening Oregon. There were clearly impacts. There were protests. There was actually a staged protest there where people parked their cars and blocked traffic. And ultimately it was put to a vote. So we're facing similar decisions on how we connect the east and west parts of our city with these rail crossings as trains become more frequent and they also increase in length. And so the council has decided to try a best-of-breed decision-making tool called Context-Sensitive Solutions, or CSS. And I wanted to talk to you just a little bit about what CSS is. So CSS was developed by the Federal Highway Authority and has since been adopted by the federal government. It's been adopted by many states as the best way to create community consensus around large transportation projects. In the word context includes not just the best technical solution for transportation, but goals like livability, sustainability, the environment around the tracks, aesthetics. And you know, it's a collaborative and an interdisciplinary and holistic approach. So it's not only looking at the technical solution, but looking at a lot of the other needs involved in the area. And so kind of the old way people have done projects is the engineers would get together and come up with the best technical solution. They'd decide, this is the thing we should do. They would communicate it to the community, and then they would defend it as objections were raised. And the idea with CSS is not to come up with a technical solution up front, but to really involve the entire community in getting input, understanding the technical information, and really iterating to come up with creative solutions. So we're going to try to kick off the CSS process today. I hope you guys will keep an open mind as we try this kind of new approach to approaching projects. So there are 4 key principles to CSS. There's shared stakeholder vision, comprehensive understanding of the context itself, ongoing communication, and creativity in solutions. And it looks like my slide the picture got a little thing there, but the last part there says that all CSS processes should build consensus around the issues first. And that's what we're going to try to tackle today. So like a lot of things, it's all about determining what's the problem that we're trying to solve. And if we can agree to what the issues are, then we can move forward. But if we can't agree to what problem we're trying to solve, it really makes it difficult to come up with a solution. So the context we're dealing with is really multidimensional. There's issues around safety, noise, traffic flow, mass transit needs. We have freight trains that use this corridor. East-west connectivity and how we get to our schools. And some of the solutions may require removing homes along the tracks or limiting connections between Alma and cross streets. No one wants to remove homes. So, we're here to really try to be creative, but we also can't create just magical solutions. We have constraints. Cost is going to be a constraint. And we need to understand the impacts and the corresponding benefits. So it's a difficult problem, and I'm really glad to see so many people showed up to get involved. The other thing I wanted to say about CSS is, as the mayor said, we need to have continuity in the process. So if you're interested in getting involved, you should let our staff know today. We're considering a range of options from ongoing workshops like this to a dedicated stakeholder group. And even if there was a dedicated group and you weren't on it, I think there's always opportunities to form ad hoc groups and let people who are representing you know how you feel. So I think everybody can be involved as much as they want in this process. So the last thing I want to leave you with is a challenge. And I think it's human nature to think that we understand the problem and want to immediately jump to answers. I certainly want to jump to answers. Sorry. Oh. I know other people in the room want to jump to answers. But the challenge today, I think, is really to go outside the box and try to focus on really understanding and defining what the problem we need to solve is today. So thanks for coming, and I look forward to a productive morning and afternoon. Thanks.
Thank you, Council Member. I'm Josh Mello. I'm the city's Chief Transportation Official. I want to thank everyone for coming out today. This is great turnout. Folks in the back, there are some seats up front available if you want to sit down. There's plenty of seats in the front tables. Today, I'm going to kick this off by walking us kind of along the corridor from north to south. Many of you may use some of these grade crossings on a daily basis, one particular crossing more often than others. I want to give you kind of a general overview of the existing grade crossings as well as our existing grade separations, and also a couple of grade separations that are identified in plans but are not yet constructed. So starting from north to south, we're going to walk all the way from the San Francisco Creek all the way down to San Antonio Road. This is a context map that we've developed. There's a version in the back there, and there's also this map on your tables. This will be helpful in the afternoon session when we start to talk about problem definition, and you may need a frame of reference, and the map is available for you at that time. So we've developed some symbology to help start to think about some of the problems at each of the grade crossings. So you'll see as we move through, we'll have information on the amount of traffic at each of the grade crossings, the level of service. So level of service is a calculation of delay for motorists. So it goes all the way from A to F, A being no delay at all for motorists, and F being gridlock at an intersection. We also have the number of lanes, so not all of our grade crossings have the same number of lanes. Also, not all of them have bicycle lanes. We have that noted as well. And then collisions are also an important factor when we start to talk about the problems at these grade crossings. So we've collected collision data from the last 3 years for each of the crossings, and we'll talk about that as we move through. And then finally, whether there's a traffic signal or a stop sign adjacent to the grade crossing. There's also some helpful symbology that you'll see on the slides that show the type of crossing. So on the left, you can see there's existing at grade, trail at grade, an undercrossing and overcrossing. And then there's some that are trail and car undercrossing, trail overcrossing, and then a trail and car overcrossing. And I think they're pretty self-explanatory. If you have any questions during my presentation or comments, I think we have a time for a couple comments or questions during each of the grade separations. So feel free to raise your hand. And then lastly, we have some planned crossings that are also up for discussion today. So our first at-grade crossing is just south of San Francisco Creek. It's formerly known as Palo Alto Avenue, but a lot of people call it the Alma Street crossing. It is at the far north end of Alma Street. There's a park on both sides of the crossing, and there's also a major historic site, El Palo Alto, just to the north of the grade crossing. It's a 2-lane crossing with bicycle lanes. One of the other things I want to talk about today is some minor grade crossing improvements that we do have planned through a partnership with Caltrain. And Caltrain has those funded, and they should be constructed within the next couple years. We're working with them to advance those. So this is one of the crossings where there are minor improvements planned. And by minor improvements, I just mean some striping and signing, additional medians. In the case of Palo Alto Avenue, there's an issue with pedestrians walking on the side of the crossing with no sidewalk, so they're going to add some pedestrian signage. We also have bicyclists who are riding diagonally across the crossing. If they're going eastbound, they ride diagonally in the crossing itself to get to the path that's on the north side. So Caltrain is going to add a barricade that will channelize the bicyclist to the left turn. We actually have a left turn pocket available for bicyclists that's shown in the top image there. But again, those are going to be very minor improvements. So even when they're finished, I think we're still going to have some desires to do additional improvements there. And we'll talk about that today, this afternoon, what some of the problems are at that crossing. The next crossing I want to talk about is an Everett Avenue bicycle and pedestrian crossing. This is a planned crossing. And by planned, I just mean it's been identified in a plan somewhere. We haven't done any kind of design work or analysis as to what this would cost or any kind of preliminary engineering or anything. It's basically identified in a plan. There is a little bit of funding allocated to this through the Stanford Medical Center agreement. But this would be a crossing similar to what's at Homer Avenue. It would be for bicyclists and pedestrians. And it would roughly connect Everett Avenue to Quarry Road and the bus loop that's just in the center there between Caltrain and El Camino. The next crossing, moving north to south, is the University Avenue Undercrossing. This is an existing grade separation. So the road goes underneath the rail corridor. There are no bicycle lanes. It's a 4-lane roadway for motor vehicles. And then there are fairly wide sidewalks on both sides that connect to the Caltrain station via ramps on either side. There are some pretty significant circulation issues at this crossing on either side. It's not very pedestrian friendly on the El Camino side, and a lot of cyclists elect to ride on the sidewalk even though it's prohibited because there's no bike facilities through the University Avenue tunnel. And this illustrates on either side of the tunnel the pedestrian and motor vehicle accommodations. And then the next one we have is Homer Avenue, which Homer Avenue was recently constructed. It's a bicycle and pedestrian tunnel. It connects to the end of Homer Avenue. There's a traffic signal on the Alma Street side, and then there are ramps that go down on both ends. It's a fairly popular route for cyclists who want to travel from downtown Palo Alto to Churchill Avenue and the south end of the Stanford campus, as well as down the Park Boulevard, Bike Boulevard, down to Evergreen Park and Ventura and further south to Mountain View. The next crossing, moving north to south, is the Embarcadero Road undercrossing. This is another tunnel that goes underneath the railroad corridor. It's somewhat similar to the University Avenue undercrossing in the fact that it does not have bicycle lanes, but it has fairly wide pedestrian sidewalks on either side. Again, the condition there is bicyclists often ride through on the sidewalks, creating conflicts between bicyclists and pedestrians. This tunnel also has an imbalanced laneage, so there's 2 westbound lanes and only 1 eastbound lane, and that leads to some congestion spilling back towards El Camino in the 1-lane eastbound direction. We also have congestion spilling back from El Camino through the tunnel as far back as Bryant Street at times. And the remainder of Embarcadero Road is 4 lanes. The tunnel segment is the only section that has 3 lanes with 1 eastbound lane and 2 westbound lanes. And Embarcadero also it starts to descend under the tracks fairly far back from the rail corridor. So a lot of the local streets directly adjacent to the crossing are cut off from Embarcadero. So you have to backtrack a little bit to move through there as a pedestrian or cyclist, and also as a motorist. The connections up to Alma also use local streets. They've been turned into kind of off-ramps for Embarcadero to connect to Alma. So there's some recurring pedestrian conflicts that occur at those streets because people are using them as off-ramps to get to Alma. Churchill Avenue is the next crossing moving south, and as many of you know, we have hundreds of student bicyclists using this crossing in the morning and the afternoons, and unfortunately this crossing is actually scored extremely high in the state's Section 130 program, and the Section 130 program is state funding allocated to the most dangerous grade crossings in the state, and they use a kind of an objective formula to calculate exposure rates and collision rates and histories. And Churchill Avenue has risen to the top recently, and we're actually in line to get quite a bit of funding to do some pretty significant safety improvements at this crossing. It will not separate the crossing, but it will add a new traffic signal. We're hoping to construct a new, if you go to the next slide, Maylee. We're hoping to construct a new bicycle path on the north side of the crossing that will connect to the path that's along Churchill, and then install some new bicycle signalization at Alma and Churchill. And there will also be motor vehicle improvements that will keep motor vehicles from sitting on the tracks when there's a red light approaching Alma Street. So we can talk more about that later in the day if you have questions about those specific improvements, but we're going to see some fairly significant ones at Churchill. Oregon Expressway is the next grade separation moving south, and Oregon Expressway is a county-maintained road by Santa Clara County Department of Roads and Airports. I'm sure many of you use this undercrossing. It's design-wise, it's fairly complex. There's lots of off-ramps and on-ramps from Alma, very tight geometry, very poor sight lines when you're merging from the ramps onto Oregon Expressway. There are no pedestrian or bicycle accommodations in the Oregon Tunnel. However, there's a bike ped tunnel at North California Avenue that a lot of folks use to make that crossing. You can go ahead to the next. And then next up is Loma Verde Avenue. This is we're just showing this as the rough vicinity of this project. This is another one of those planned, proposed crossings in the bicycle expenditure plan from the Valley Transportation Authority. It's called the South Palo Alto Bicycle and Pedestrian Crossing. And there's actually some Measure B funding that could potentially be allocated to this. It's identified in the list of bike and ped projects that the VTA could potentially fund through the Measure B funding. And this would be a bicycle and pedestrian either overcrossing or undercrossing, and it would roughly be in the vicinity of Loma Verde Avenue, Matadero Creek, depending on what bicycle infrastructure is developed and what kind of constraints there are along there. So that would go a long way towards improving east-west mobility in South Palo Alto. And now we get to, the two of the kind of the ones that have seemed to be prioritized, in recent discussions around grade separations. Meadow Drive and Charleston Road. And geometrically, they're very similar. They both have 2 lanes with bicycle lanes. They also have intersections with Alma Street that are very close to the grade crossing, so traffic frequently spills back into the grade crossing. There's also a lot of congestion that occurs at the signalized intersections of Alma and Meadow and Alma and Charleston because the train has signal priority. So it triggers a red light at the intersection, and then the phasing gets a little bit out of whack. And oftentimes if multiple trains come through within a 2 to 3 minute period, the signal phasing at the intersection can be very, very interrupted and not work very well. These also have a lot of bicycle and pedestrian traffic related to the schools that are on Meadow and Charleston on the super block. And a lot of the students use Meadow and Charleston to travel to and from school. And this is what they look like. And there's actually a fairly significant number of collisions at Churchill, Meadow, and Charleston. I think Churchill's 13, Charleston's 11, and Meadow was 11 as well. So there's a fairly significant collision history at these, and we can get more into the details of those types of collisions and when they occurred if you're interested. Yes, sir. So the collisions are the last 3 years. Oh, Richard, do you remember what the ADT data? 2016 ADT data. Yes, collected in 16. Oh, the question was, when was the annual daily traffic number, which is 16,000 in this case, when was that collected? And the answer was 2016. Yes. So the question was, please provide more detail on the level of service and what the D and D means. The first D is the morning peak period. So in the morning, it's at a level of service D. And the peak hour is the busiest hour in the morning. And then the second number, the second letter is the afternoon peak hour. So that's the busiest hour in the evening rush hour. Yes? Yes, sir. We'll certainly put them up. And there's a rail program webpage that we can give you the link to after this. Yes. Yes, and we have a diagnostic meeting, which a diagnostic meeting is when the California Public Utilities Commission, the city, and Caltrain all meet to discuss the safety issues at a crossing. We have a diagnostic meeting scheduled for Charleston and Meadow. And we had a similar diagnostic meeting 2 years ago for Churchill in advance of them funding the grade crossing improvements. So I think the safety issues are starting to be taken very seriously at both Charleston and Meadow as well. Yes, ma'am. Yes, we will post all materials from this meeting on our rail program website on the city webpage. And again, we can give you that link after the meeting. So then lastly, I think I'm a little short for time here. You can go to the last slide. San Antonio Road. Now, San Antonio Road is split between Mountain View and Palo Alto. The bulk of the overcrossing is in Mountain View, but one of the ramps actually begins in Palo Alto. So it sort of straddles the city limits. So we didn't want to leave this one out because, it does, a lot of Palo Alto residents do use this crossing. But this is an example of an overcrossing, a traditional overcrossing. Again, on the Palo Alto, on the east side, it uses local streets as the ramps to connect. So Byron Street and San Antonio Avenue are used to access the ramp if you're coming from Alma Street and you want to go over to Los Altos. And this also has a fairly significant footprint in the amount of space that's taken to get up to go over the crossing. This goes over Alma and the railroad. And there's some ramps that go up kind of between the train tracks and Alma up to connect to westbound San Antonio or southbound San Antonio. And with that, that gives you kind of a very quick overview of the corridor. And there's certainly more to talk about, and you guys know best, the ones who use the corridor often. Yes, sir. So that's a little outside of the scope of this presentation, but I'll be glad. I'm finishing right now. We can go outside and we can talk a little bit about that. And then this afternoon, you'll have a great opportunity to talk about that. And with that, one more question. Yes, sir. So we're gonna continue in our presentations, and there'll be plenty of opportunity later in the day to talk about some of the problems that are gonna arise from projects that are in development. But Chris is gonna go into an overview of the circulation along the corridor and talk about some of the analysis that they've completed to date.
Thank you, Josh. Chris Metzger again with the team supporting the city on this. And just for reference, I was also the project manager on Homer Avenue, so have some history on this corridor. So the challenges that we'll be discussing today will encompass these and probably expand on these, but these are things we've heard in the past, both here in Palo Alto and in general for similar situations. Safety obviously is very important, and we'll talk about that quite a bit. Connectivity across the rail. The rail is a barrier from each side, cuts the city in half. So we want to talk about that. Disruptions to traffic as a result of the trains running and how that's going to change over time. Bicycle and pedestrian access, Josh talked a lot about that. Noise and visual impacts are things that we want to hear about today. And the potential for future growth, what's going to happen in the future, how things are going to change in the future, and how what we might talk about today will accommodate or address that. Just some context. Recently, Santa Clara County, as you know, passed Measure B. That has allocated $700 million for grade separations throughout the county. Currently, there are 8 projects on that list in 3 different cities. The 4 we're talking about today, and 2 in Mountain View and 2 in Sunnyvale. And then the status of implementing that measure, it's still under development. There's quite a bit of work been done, but quite a bit of work left to do in terms of the actual guidelines. So I know Josh is very involved in committees working on how to implement that program.
Why nothing in Mountain View? Why no projects in Mountain View?
There are 2 in Mountain View. Okay, no problem. On a broader spectrum, outside or in addition to Santa Clara County along the Caltrain corridor, what else is going on? The 4 projects at the top, Mountain View and Sunnyvale, were mentioned. These are the specific locations: Castro / Moffett, Rangsdorf. Those have been under development for quite a while, and there's some exhibits around the room on where they are in their development. Sunnyvale is looking at Bernardo Avenue and Mary Avenue for some great separation work there. And then Menlo Park, San Jose, Burlingame, and San Mateo. So there's quite a bit of work going on up and down the corridor in terms of grade separations, and Caltrain is looking at and involved in a lot of different aspects there. A lot of work has been done in the past. Currently, the Palo Alto 2030 Comprehensive Plan is being updated. Transportation infrastructure investments look at some of the things we'll be talking about in terms of full grade separations. Again, parsing out and being very mindful of all the different movements across the tracks and throughout the city, not just vehicles, but pedestrians, bicycles. Looking at retrofitting perhaps the existing undercrossings that Josh just walked through, and construction of new crossings, as we talked about. In 2014, there was a study that was performed to look at what it would take to take Caltrain down under multiple crossings, either 2 or 4 or all the way through the city. So the work has been done on what that would take to go under. And then previous to that, in 2013, there were a corridor plan was developed, and there's some goals here. And that's really what part of the process today is, to come up with goals in today's setting. So 2013 work was done, but we really want to revisit that and reestablish the goals going forward. This map you've seen, this is a study area map. It is on there on your table. So when we look at potential alternatives for improvements at any of the cross streets and Caltrain, we'll analyze what those improvements, the impacts those will have done. This is the area that we look at, the dark shaded area throughout the city.
What are the circles around the crossing?
So the circles are, what is the radius on those? Half mile. So they're walking and they're a higher impact of the location. So you have different impacts the further away you go from a location.
Do you have a laser pointer so we can see what you're looking at?
I do not. Do we have a laser pointer? We do not. These are all on your table, and the leaders at the tables will point through. But there is the question was the circles around each of the 4 crossings that we're looking at. And those are half miles, so they're a little more focused areas of study. Many of these numbers you saw on the slides that Josh walked through, but this is a compilation to kind of allow you to look at some comparisons. We won't go through every number, but some things to pull out. The highest volume of vehicular traffic is at Charleston, and second highest is at Palo Alto, so that's where the majority of vehicles go. Altogether, there's over 50,000 vehicle trips across Caltrain at grade. These don't take into account the grade-separated crossings. These are just the 4 at-grade crossing, 50,000. Bicyclists have a different pattern. They really focus at Churchill and Meadow with lower numbers, as you can see at the northern and southern ends of Palo Alto and Charleston Avenue. You look at the transit, the facilities, primarily bus. Again, you're back to where the higher vehicular movements are, Palo Alto and Charleston. So you can start to see a pattern. Then the school buses are really focused at Churchill and Meadow. Heavy truck back to Palo Alto, and so on. And we talked about the collisions over the last 3 years there. The second to last line, the max Q, reflects how many cars back up when a train is going and the gates are down, and what the longest queue is. So you can see the longest there is 25, up to 25 vehicles, or even more at Charleston. And those are in the slash, it's eastbound and then westbound. So you can see the eastbound back up there, but no westbound. Yes?
Are there any numbers, or do you guys look at how these compare to standard traffic lights, for example, on El Camino or Alma? I just want to make sure we're not having an isolated view.
Good point. So the question is, how does this compare to a standard traffic signal, say at El Camino or streets crossing El Camino? We do have those that will come into play when we look at the broader impact. So if we make an improvement at one of these locations, how does that affect the overall broader circulation in the city?
Not so much on as it effect, but for example, gate down number second, 45, 39, 39, 40. I've waited sometimes 5 minutes at your standard traffic light. And I guess the overall thought here is that we seem to think that a Caltrain crossing is somehow different than an average stoplight.
Good point. Right. So it's a comparison of what you'd experience elsewhere, regardless of whether there's a train or not in your traffic. And that is true, and we absolutely have some of that information. This is focused on these grade crossings and what's going to happen. So this is a starting point of data as to where we might go, depending on things. So there were lots of different hands up. Sorry, there was one, that hand came down. Okay, right. Okay, so a general comment on the difference between a gate. Hold on, there's.
How can the max speed be 0 on Charleston and Meadow Drive westbound when Charleston backs up sometimes down to Charleston, like 25 plus, and you live there 0, and it's massive westbound.
Okay. So we'll we'll note that. When we do these numbers, we go out at certain times. We can't cover every day. When we go out there, we go out for, say, a week at a time and monitor it. Maybe in that week there was something going on that, but. At the gates, correct. Thank you. Hold on. Okay. Okay. So let me just kind of overarching. This is data that we have, and it's a starting point. And if there are specific questions, we can address those. The analysis will take into account the broader spectrum. These are slices in time at specific locations.
I have a question about methodology. I heard earlier that this is going to be based on level of service analysis. All the other analysis that are used for traffic congestion is vehicle miles traveled. That has to ultimately relate to the position of the Public Utilities Commission in their review, their preference for grade separation, and their very specific requirements for environmental review and for sequence. So are we doing apples to apples? And are we integrating the PUC standards in
Okay.
this survey of preference that we're going through?
Good question, good point in terms of vehicle miles traveled and what's required. We absolutely will analyze to the current CEQA requirements and PUC elements of vehicle miles traveled in terms of an environmental document. The levels of service that were presented were simply to give you a perception and a number, a relationship of particular locations and the level of service. The analysis will be performed at vehicle on VMTs. That will be part of the analysis. Yes.
The number 127 on Churchill Avenue is heavy truck traffic. Can you give us some idea how that was measured? It seems to me that that's only the school right there. Did they get that truck in there?
Richard, you want to? Okay.
Is my mic working still?
I can turn you on.
Is my mic working? So that number actually concerns me a great deal. Oh, sorry, the question was, could you elaborate a little more on the 127 trucks that were counted on Churchill? And my answer to that is that number concerns me a great deal because Churchill is not a designated truck route. So after this meeting, I'm going to dig a little deeper into that and find out what those trucks are doing and where their destinations are. What was that?
What's the definition of a heavy truck? The school district has their yard
Yeah.
at the high school, so they could easily have 100 trucks, 50 each way, depending on the definition of a heavy truck.
Yeah, so the question is, what's the definition of a heavy truck? And it would be a semi or a box truck, right, Richard? Yeah. So a semi or a box truck, not a pickup truck or something like that. So we're going to delve deeper into this. That's a great point. And then just to kind of reaffirm kind of where we're going this afternoon, a lot of the comments seem to be towards measurement and how would we measure, different alternatives. And we're going to talk a lot about that in the afternoon. So VMT is certainly something that I think we want to talk about in the afternoon. Is that something that we incorporate into one of our goals when we get into the goals discussion? So with that, I'll turn it back over to Chris.
One more. Yep.
Are we planning for 2 tracks or 3 tracks? And the second question is, what's the status of the freight line?
So the question is how many tracks are we planning for, right? Currently it's 2 tracks. We do not know the answer as to what that would be. We're trying to define the current problems today. We're keeping in contact with Caltrain, with high-speed rail, the developments there, and whether or not there's going to be an expansion of the number of tracks. So as we go forward and how to resolve the problems that we see, that will be part of that consideration as we learn more as time goes.
The second part of the question though was freight. What's the status of freight?
So do you want
That was his question.
to talk about freight in the current?
So freight is in a little bit the question was around what's the status of freight. Freight is in a little bit of a flux right now. Caltrain currently has an agreement with Union Pacific. The other way around, sorry. Union Pacific has an agreement with Caltrain to operate freight along the corridor. They're renegotiating that, and there's a potential for a short line operator to take over freight operations along the corridor. We've submitted a letter on that process, hoping that we could see electrified freight, also hoping that delegation to a short line operator might allow us more flexibility when we start to design grade separation. So that's a work in progress. We'll keep you updated certainly on what's happening with freight as we move through this.
Some of the freight lines you're seeing are coming from Redwood City, from the construction zone down at the end of Seaport Village. There's actually trains that are coming up and using those tracks. So, I mean, that's active and that's real, but you can't demand that everybody else electrify because they're coming up there. I've seen freight trains on the Caltrain tracks. So demanding that freight electrifies is, I don't think, in the loop. My impression.
Understood. Point noted. As Josh said, it's a dynamic situation right now. There is desire to modify the current situation, but currently there is freight, there is an agreement, there is an allowance for it.
I have another question. I think there's a responsibility here to give accurate information, and I think the last several questions deal with who owns the freight, who owns the rail line. And I would suggest respectfully that there are two areas of the state where the relationship with Union Pacific and the sub-lessee railroads has been analyzed in the context of at-grade crossings. One is the SMART experience, which ended up being adjudicated before a federal agency called the Surface Transportation Board. And then there's the multi-county experience from Kern through Merced County, which dealt specifically with at-grade and specific crossings and Union Pacific and condemnation and the actual price. So those are things that I think we have to be aware of before we start putting colored spots on a map about what we want to do. What are the real constraints?
Okay. So again, we are aware of those situations. I think Josh discussed the relationship between UP and Caltrain.
I just wondered, someone's doing project support, and I wondered, are you hired by the city council, or are you the Bay Area governors, or who are you?
Who am I? Who are we?
Well, all of you.
We are a consultant team. She wants to know who we are that are supporting the city. So Scott, myself, many of the people around at the tables that are going to help facilitate the conversations today are part of the Mott MacDonald team. We are hired by the city as consultants. This is what we do. We work for agencies throughout California, and in our case throughout the world, helping agencies understand what their issues are, help analyze them, and help you get the projects that you want. Cornerstone is a subconsultant to Mott MacDonald, and they are responsible for the environmental work and the public outreach effort. Yes.
And I was kind of shocked to hear that while the construction goes on, which is about 18 months, that the train tracks will be closed. How do you propose getting thousands of people from one side of Palo Alto to the other side of Palo Alto while the construction goes on?
Okay, all right. Okay. Very good question, very important, but very far down the line of where we are today. Those are things we will take into account if we can define a project, and then we can define how that project gets actually implemented. Did you have a question? Yeah. Okay. All right. Yes. Sure.
Can you hear me? Yes. This money that we're talking about is over 30 years. Other cities are already
Yes.
To follow up on what Liz said, I was going to ask, are you hired by some of these other cities that are shown on the maps? And that Liz is saying some of those cities are ahead, so that there's some kind of consistency with how this is going to all work out.
So Mont McDonald ourselves are not hired by any of the other cities at this point in time. We certainly would like to do some work for the other ones. We are a consultant. We are a consultant for VTA, and we help implement the entire program. So we are involved in throughout Santa Clara County in helping the VTA administer the $6.5 billion. So we have a role in many areas of the overall Measure B program. Okay, so delving a little deeper into the list that we put at the beginning. So looking at safety and breaking down the safety numbers a little bit more, here's some more information. You'll note the auto collisions are the last 3 years, whereas the bicycle pedestrians and collisions are over 5-year time frame. So you can see the numbers up there, and these are just data that are available. You'll note that, and I asked about this 3 times when I saw these numbers, that there are 70 emergency vehicle trips that cross the corridor every single day. So 70 emergency vehicle trips.
Are those collisions with trains? Train collisions?
These are the collisions are not all with trains. They are not with trains. No, they're just collisions in the general area. Can be at the crossing. Right. We have those more detail, but we didn't put those up but those are kind of, so you can see that. Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask, is a round trip considered 2 trips or 1? And being in downtown, I know that a lot of them actually go through the University Avenue. So just answer your second. The first question is a round trip considered 1 trip or 2?
2. So every time a vehicle crosses the tracks is a trip across the tracks.
35.
If they're round trips, yes. And then there's some information there on suicides in the Caltrain facility. You can see they primarily occur between Sunnyvale and Burlingame. Palo Alto is right in the middle of that. And many of them are close and adjacent to grade crossings. Maylee. So circulation issues, traffic, getting back and forth across the tracks, and how do the trains impact that. Today there are at peak hours up to 8 to 10, and that counts both directions. So again, that's one train crossing the local roadway. That is intended and expected to increase by 2025 to roughly double or slightly double, and that assumes high-speed rail is operating in that. So the visual graphic that you see there is in time, and it gives you a sense of time that when it's red and you're in a car or a bike or walking, you have to stop for the train to go by. Then when it's green, you can go, assuming there's other things not impeding you. And then you have to stop again, and then you go, and then you have to stop. So the top line there is what it looks like today, and the bottom line is what it would ostensibly look like in 2025. So you see there's a lot of red and not much green, and the efficiency of getting started and stopping and starting and stopping, you take that all into account. You can see the impact that will have.
Yeah, I think somebody asked earlier about comparing this to just traffic lights. I think this is the important point, that we know there's going to be a lot more trains, so it's going to get a lot worse.
So the impact will more than triple be more than tripled. The impact will be more than tripled as a result of the increased. And again, there's more than 51,000 vehicles that cross that today.
I think this is a pretty deceptive way to describe this, because if I'm waiting at Meadow to cross Alma and the train tracks, I am waiting 2/3 of the time for the traffic that's on Alma, or much more than that, and I'll still be waiting for that traffic no matter how often the train goes by. And when the train goes by, the traffic on Alma proceeds. So it will be more times that the crossing gates are down, but it doesn't mean
Okay, that's a good point. The point was that just because you can go across the train tracks doesn't mean you can go across Alma, and that there's additional impacts in your travel day, and that is very true. This is just the impact of the trains themselves.
Yes, just two comments. One on your previous slide around our freight tally that we described as track security and suicides. The data you had was system-wide.
Correct.
The frequency and the location related to grade crossings. We have Palo Alto data that is quite different from that, and very important that our solutions be in relation to our context. So that's a very important thing.
Correct.
Second, I see that you have up here in the second bullet is correct frequency, which would be a train every 3 minutes, not every 6 minutes, correct?
This is a typical type of situation. Understand that when you get into an operating situation every single day, especially with systems such as Caltrain, they will vary.
I want to make sure everyone understands that the projection is what is up there in bullet number 2. And
Right.
it is 10 trains per hour per direction maximum,
Correct.
which is 20 trains per hour, which is a train every 3 minutes on average, not every 6 minutes.
Okay, so the clarification is it's every 6 minutes each direction. And then how that spacing and timing goes will define what the gap is in between. That's true. Yes.
I also wanted to mention, though, the fact that they blow the horn from Charleston to East Meadow continuously. So that would mean the horn starts blowing at 5 a.m. and you can hear it miles, and it'll be going off twice as long. And I mean, it may be that, well, you get the picture, the noise factor.
Okay, very good. So those are the type of issues we want to bring up at the tables in the afternoon, for sure.
Yeah, this says that it's not a 30-year problem. It's an 8-year problem.
Okay, can you explain that? The point was it's not a 30-year problem, it's an 8-year problem, meaning the problem will occur in 8 years. Yes, right. The tax is over 30 years. The trains are over 8 years. Correct. Sorry, I didn't. Okay. I'm going to get the hook pretty soon. I've been given my warning. So we're going to try to move on here with some additional issues. We already talked about the 4. We've walked through those locations. Some of the points to note here is that as we have the discussions today, and as we come to solutions at the focus points, that those solutions have impacts broader than that. If you plug a hole in a dam here, there's going to be more water going through the other hole next to it. So those are just some of the items to think about here. Relative to bicycle and pedestrian, Palo Alto is rightfully very proud of the amount of bicyclists they have and the variety of bicyclists that use facilities. That's something that is increasingly coming into play in many of the, there's an awareness that it's not just the high-level bicycle riders that use facilities. It's kids, it's families, it's every level of bicycle rider, and we're very aware of that. Yes.
Nobody's mentioned accessibility for mobility impaired people, and you can see that difference between the Homer Avenue undercrossing and the California Avenue undercrossing, which is totally inaccessible and very dangerous for most people.
So the point was about accessibility. Anything that's developed will meet current accessibility standpoints, and that's a very good point. The requirements previously were much different than they were when we did Homer.
On your slide, you say there are 5 crossings and 1 pedestrian, bicycle pedestrian. There are 6 crossings and 2 pedestrians. You don't even talk about California Avenue as a crossing.
Okay. Okay. Noted.
Can I just add that there are absolutely no bicycle
Okay. So talking about bicycle crossings, again, those are the items we want to document this afternoon in terms of what the major issues are and defining the problem this afternoon. Large majority of students are crossing on foot or bike throughout. So, and then we had some discussion on the noise and the impacts that will have and the requirements of trains to notify when they're coming to a crossing. Palo Alto has a higher standard, as noted here, a lower decibel than neighboring cities in terms of that. Quiet zones are an item there that there's a methodology, and it's a very dynamic and evolving part of the practice of trains crossing local roads and quiet zones and the requirements, and they're ever changing, but that's definitely something we keep on top of and the city's talked about a lot. So if that's something to discuss today.
Is there any verification of that under not more than 36 dBAs? Because I think it's louder in Palo Alto than Menlo Park.
So all I can tell you is there's goals and there's reality, and we are aware of that.
From what I understand, Marin County just started up their smart train system, and they were successful in implementing quiet zones for the majority of it, and I think we can do that too. And what I also understand that theoretically we could actually make the entire peninsula a quiet zone if we install quad gates up and down the peninsula, which is on the roadmap as well.
There are requirements. So the point there was that SMART up in Marin and Sonoma counties has implemented quiet zones. It is possible. There's a process to go through, there's expense to go through, and it is a changing requirement scenario.
Just a brief comment about the commuters. There's a lot of commuters who actually do not stay completely within Palo Alto. And my concern is the famous Alma Street death trap. That is to say, there's a nice way for a bicyclist to make a straight trip from San Antonio south, and there's a nice way all the way to, at least to downtown, on the other side of the tracks, between Charleston and downtown. There's no safe way to get one from one place to the other. There's a bicycle path, but that asks a commuter to come practically over to Coverly before going back. That doesn't work.
Okay.
So people are routinely bicycling down Alma Street.
Okay.
And there are things that could be done. There could be ameliorations, underpasses,
Okay.
and a better sidewalk system. Nothing's happening.
Okay.
And
Very
something
good.
needs to happen there.
Okay, so the question or the statement was about the overall bicycle system, not just at these crossings, and that's also something, this afternoon, one of the questions you'll be asked is, are there broad overarching concerns and issues? That would be a perfect type of thing to bring up at that point in time. Yes, okay. And then finally, again, we have these maps on the table. What they depict is the land uses immediately adjacent within that radius that we talked about, the half mile, to the 4 crossings that we're talking about. And you can see with the different colors and the different land uses. We have residential in yellow, commercial, mixed use, public facility. So at Palo Alto, you can see there's quite a variety of uses adjacent to that, but we can go to the next location. Here at Churchill, you'll see it's almost exclusively residential, and then the public facility, and then as you go through, and again, you can see it on your table, highly residential as we move further south. And I think that is it.
Great, thanks, Chris. We're gonna.
There's one more question.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Clarification on the noise, the mitigation with Caltrain modernization, the decibel rating, is that something that is a measured number that is now capped at, or is this for the goal to have it with noise capped? I didn't understand that.
Those are goals to try to achieve.
Not anything measured.
Well, there's typically ongoing measurements, and we will probably study that as part of the environmental work in terms of what the existing conditions are and what the changes would be. But there are always conditions when the train runs where they have certain requirements that you know, it will always be different in reality than it is in the goals. Pardon me?
Has there been any historical noise measurements? And is that data available?
I don't know that there is for sure, but I gotta believe we have some data.
We haven't done any as part of this work currently, but there may be historical stuff that we can get. So I just want to say the feedback you guys are giving is this is exactly what we came to hear, and what we're going to spend all afternoon, if you can stay, to do is to make sure we get the input you've given written down and documented so we can get it all. And that's one of the challenges is this first part, we're not able to write this stuff down. So one of the things I want to make sure is if you haven't got it, you should get a comment sheet and write these questions and things on there and submit them to us so we get those documented, things like VMT and quiet zones and noise issues and analyzing the signals adjacent to. That's all the stuff we're trying to collect to make sure we have a really comprehensive list of all the issues and things we got to consider as we start to develop and evaluate different grade crossings. Yes, one, and we're going to do a quick little thing and then break for lunch.
Yeah, I just one comment and one question, if I may. So the first comment, I think you missed the most important slide of all. The most important slide of all is the slide showing the timeline for this process. On the left-hand side showing where we are today, and the timeline showing how many meetings we're having, when we're going to make a submission, what the target is. So I think that's really important to get everybody aligned on the time frame for what we're going through. The second is a question. Is it a desired outcome of this process that we will create a ranking of the 4 crossings? Because I don't think there's going to be enough money for 4 crossings. So is it a desired outcome that we're going to rank them 1 to 4?
Yeah, I think those are really good questions, and they are questions. Well, the comment and the question. And so the process, we laid out some rough goals in terms of the timeline. Part of that's really dictated because, as we talked about, this process involves all of you. And so we want to work together to develop a series of improvements. So it depends on how quickly we can, with the community, get through the process. Your second one is really important as well. Another question about this is how much do we want to prioritize things, and can certain improvements move forward before more comprehensive things? That's part of the whole discussion with you all to figure out how we evaluate alternatives and options going forward. Do we need to rank them because we need to do something before something else, or do we do it all at once? That's really a question for the community to kind of work through and give us some feedback on. So we want to do a quick survey to this technology we want to use and see might use in the meetings going forward if it works for us. This is so if hopefully if everybody has a smartphone. If you don't have a smartphone, we have a old-fashioned paper version of this, and we're just going to kind of collect some basic information about the folks here in the room. This isn't a scientific survey. We're not going to do much with this other than just kind of understand, ask you some questions. We'll use this at the end of the meeting too to get some feedback about how the meeting went today. So you can see up on the screen, if you have a smartphone, you go to sif.ly. Yes? Oh, okay. So yeah, if you can go there, raise your hand if you get there, and then you should see a yellow box that it says enter your participant code, and that's connecting Palo Alto. Type that in, and you should get, yes? Oh, you're in. Okay, good, great. People are starting to get connected. You can, if you've got in, is it slow? Yeah, and also raise your hand, wave it this time if you need a paper copy. There you go, a couple here. Yeah, people. Yeah, if you have a smartphone, it would be great to try to log in here, and once you do it, then it'll be a lot easier going forward in future meetings. And that way we have a lot. You should see, you should be waiting for us to start the survey. Then you're good. Yep, you shouldn't see anything. It should say waiting to start the survey or waiting to let you in. And as soon as we get enough critical mass, we'll let you in. You'll see the first question. Are we there? Okay. So, it's connecting Palo Alto. Yeah, I know. We'll maybe think of a shorter participant code next time. CPA or something. Do you need spaces? Do you need to include the spaces
Yes.
between connecting, space Palo, space Alto? So the first question's up there, and it's which grade crossing do you live closest to? And these are the at-grade crossings, and you can see we have live results show as people log in and make their selection. So the kind of dark gray is Meadow, blue is Churchill, red is Charleston, and orange is Palo Alto or Alma Street. Are you getting in? There you go. All right, give you another minute or two here. 30 seconds. 30 seconds, we'll go to the next question. Pretty evenly divided between Churchill and Charleston. Is this saying we have no one at Meadow, or are we just not seeing the percent? It's hard to see. No, we are. So it's about the same too, about 30%. Okay, we'll go to the next question. Should pop up. Which existing grade separation do you use the most? So again, these are the existing grade separations: Oregon Expressway, Embarcadero, San Antonio University, and Homer, which is the bike ped. See, boy, Oregon Expressway is way in the lead. There we go. All right. All right. And who's in the lead? Yes, Oregon Expressway. Followed closely by San Antonio. But give another 30 seconds. We'll go to the next one. This is great. Good. Okay. Next question. How close do you live to the nearest grade crossing? So a quarter mile, that's like a block or two away. Or less than a quarter mile be a block or two away. A quarter mile be beyond that, 3 or 4 blocks away. A half mile is probably about a 15, 20-minute walk or more. A mile be beyond that. So how close do you live to one of these grade crossings? So pretty good distribution. We got quite a few people, half mile and less than a quarter mile. Good, good, good. We're getting the hang of it. Good. All right. We have one more. Last one. All right. This one says rank the 6 following concerns regarding grade crossing. So I know these are kind of general, but if you can think about the issues and things you may have already raised or heard to try to put them into these categories and rank them from your most important concern. There we go. So bicycle pedestrian safety, safety in general, community connectivity, noise, traffic disruptions, or visual impacts. So safety is way out in the lead, followed by bikes. Traffic just jumped up. Look at that. Oh. The cars and the bikes are competing there. Look at that. That's just like in the real world. All right, well, we're finishing that. So we're going to take about 15 minutes for you to stretch your legs, go to the restroom, grab some food. What we would really like to do on your name tag is a number. and that is to the table number that we'd like you to sit at. That just helps us make sure that we get the tables filled up and we have kind of a cross-section of folks in there. We're more randomly dispersed. So I'd love to do that. If you've already camped out at a table, got all your stuff, it's hard to move, that's fine. We just want to make sure we try to fill up the tables and we have a good group at each. So let's take 15 minutes. We'll come back at 11:35, and then we'll talk about what we're going to do this afternoon, okay? Are you guys about ready? Good. Almost ready. Look at that work. That's good work. I like that. I know those guys. All right. Are you guys ready over here? Are you ready to report? Okay. Good. Excellent. Yay. Did you have fun? Good. All right, well, let's go ahead and start reporting back out. Table 2, are you guys ready here yet? Do you need another minute? Are you guys ready? Are you ready? All right, guys, everybody, listen up. So we're going to go around the room. Again, we're going to have each table report out 3 of the challenges they talked about and 3 of the goals they talked about, just to get a sense of what others have talked about. So this is just to listen, and each table will get a chance to report on what they've been working on. So table 2.
Okay, let's see. In general, we had the issue that more trains will impede crossing the tracks and increase traffic jams. But in particular, we'd like to see improvements at the intersections to look at the lanes that we have and the best way to use the lanes to help people get through the intersections. For example, at Meadow, there's a right turn lane that gets backed up immediately by the through traffic that becomes unavailable. Let's see. Oh, we're concerned about safety for bikes and pedestrians all through the corridor, of course. And let's see. We are, for the goals, we really like, we want to
reduce horn noise and train noise.
We want to reduce horn noise and train noise. We really want the grade separations to happen. We want all 4 grade separations to happen. We don't want to see just 2 done. We want them all done. We want to make sure that we think that will help move traffic efficiently across the rail corridor in Palo Alto, and I think that'll be a big benefit. And we want to produce non-single occupancy vehicle use, which could be bikes or peds, or could be other ways of changing the mix of traffic. I think that's good.
Good, excellent. Perfect. All right. Good job, you guys. All right, table 3. I think Frank's going to speak.
Yes.
Excellent.
Okay. So, we were looking at the challenges. So we said Charleston, Meadow, and Churchill. We thought were the worst because of school and the peak commute times in the morning, and then they have sort of a double peak at school recess and then at rush hour. The second point here was the east-west barrier effect that the train has just through the city, is that concentrates the traffic in these few cross places, and that, of course, makes just whatever the problems are worse. And the frustration of wading through these things makes people worse drivers with their road rage. So as we make it better, it actually gets even better as people get less frustrated. And then just the big employers on one side and more residential on the other side, so it causes more cross traffic. Then as our goals here, we wanted to, let's see, fix visual intrusion, make these things look very clear and obvious
what to do, not to have too many barriers, not to make it difficult for drivers to get across. Basically, we thought the train, the goal that would be great is the train has no impact whatsoever on the traffic, whether the autos, pedestrians, bicycles are all able to work separately without interfering with one another. Remove the east-west constraints so that the city, you can go wherever you want without having to worry about going around. And then the noise we talked about, particularly freight trains at night, but again, if we're dreaming here, silent is good, works for me. So
great.
Hmm?
Plane routes.
The
When it intersects the plane routes.
Oh, when the plane flies over the train at the intersection, that's the worst, yeah.
Planes, trains, and autos. Awesome.
No.
Thank you. All right, table 4, Martin. Good job.
So my name's Martin Summer. The little bit of humor I was asking the moderator is what happened to table 1? Were there no goals and objectives there? just joking. So anyway, we had a lot of heated discussion, but it turns out our challenges and our goals were right in line. The 3 challenges were noise, safety, and circulation. Specifically train noise, bike and auto safety, and circulation as in getting east-west across town, which has been pretty much a common theme, I think, the last few years. What is interesting, when we drilled down just a little bit more, is we really came up to what we started with, the context-sensitive design, which, for example, a solution for Churchill may not be the same solution that you would use on Meadow or Charleston. So an example there too is Churchill, as we all know, it's right next to the high school, and it may be heavier on a pedestrian solution, whereas Meadow or Charleston may be heavier on an auto solution. And even within Meadow and Charleston, we may, for example, allow left-hand turns from Alma across Charleston, but not Meadow, or vice versa. So it just boiled down to the context with respect to each individual crossing. So that's it.
Great, thank you. Yes, very good job. All right.
Thank you.
Table 5, John.
We identified 3 major issues. 2 of them are kind of the same, but the auto and truck traffic in general, the noise, and then the bike and pedestrian crossings having safe access. And the goals are basically, we want to grade separate Charleston. But one thing that we kind of looked at was that we want to prioritize the big projects. Part of the problem is you get these simple solutions for little things, and those get done right away. And then the big solution kind of gets put off, and then the money's gone. So we want to be able to start from scratch with whatever money we have. We want to prioritize it so that the bigger projects get completed. And as a third goal, we'd like to improve the signals and coordinate them better at the crossings. Too much waiting around, and then everything recycles to Alma when the train passes. And so you wait and wait and wait, and backups, particularly on Charleston, are extreme. And that would be it.
Great, thanks, John. Good job. All right, table 6, Mirror, right?
Yeah, so I guess probably the top 3 issues we came up with at our table, definitely number 1 was safety, really, and just encompassing all the safety issues for pedestrians, for bicyclists, for the cars, but also safety as far as means restriction for suicide prevention as something really to be thinking about as we come up with whatever solution for grade separation we use, recognizing that physical barriers being sort of the gold standard for suicide prevention in this respect. I think also we talked about really the issue of what I call reinventing the wheel, but really the idea that there's been a lot of previous efforts made in this regard over the last half decade or longer, and really to draw on that knowledge and all the hard work that's already been done, both to allow for everyone's input now, but not get too bogged down that we really slow down a process that's been probably too long in the coming as it is. Certainly to refer back to the Real Corridor study from the comprehensive plan as one example of that. Just so that we can move forward as quickly as we can. The other one I think we talked about was the part of identifying solutions that do also enhance not just traffic circulation locally, but also really improving the rail corridor as far as service and what it can accommodate as far as users, both now, but also recognizing that, like it or not, our area is going to continue to change over the next 50 to 100 years, and to really be thinking about solutions that allow for whatever change we need to be making down the road as well, as far as preserving options for expansion along the rail service and along the rail line. And then I think lastly, just quickly, funding sources for whatever project we take on, to be really the critical importance of bringing Stanford to the table, to involve them in this. They have a lot invested in what the outcome is, and I think a lot of resources, but also just to recognize we need to think about any and all sources for funding this, since we can be sure that between the city and the county, we may not have all the resources we'd hope we would to get this done. Anything else, people? Okay.
Thank you, Mayor. Nice work, guys. Excellent. All right, table 7.
Here you go.
Tina and Karen, thank you. Yep, there you
Hi, I'm Karen Kalinsky. I live on East Meadow. The issues that we prioritized as our top 3 were first, safety, particularly at the 3 at-grade crossings that are school crossings, and we want improved safety for our students. The second is the concern about the traffic congestion, and particularly the wait times at all of these at-grade crossings. The third is not just noise, but also noise and the pollution that is caused by traffic backups, that people live near those streets are having to breathe the car pollution that is stalled at those intersections. So our goals, and we took goals to mean something that would be measurable results, not how to achieve these solutions, but how we would measure results. So the 3 results relating to our 3 priorities are with respect to traffic congestion and wait times, that we would like to see wait times at these at-grade crossings reduced by at least 80%. We'd like to reduce bicycle and pedestrian train incidents to 0. And we'd like to reduce the train noise and traffic pollution caused by the traffic backed up at these at-grade crossings. Thank you.
Very nice. All right. I'm going to go here.
I want to echo, our table wants to echo all the other tables, identification of the challenges. We had more people before, it's not just us 3. Just the traffic backups, the improved bike pedestrian safety, the noise complaints. So we want to focus our spiel on visual challenges. We thought that the existing underpassings have a very industrial feel, which isn't very, it doesn't feel very safe or neighborhood-like, and that's something we think, looking forward to, something to keep. Also thinking about the vegetation, keeping more vegetation, and also having better views, like being able to see across. That might be nice to have as well. And also thinking about keeping things on a human scale. Like, for example, Oregon Expressway, it feels designed for cars, like big cars, big trucks moving through. But if we had designed future crossings to be more on a human scale level, it may make things feel better. And that's kind of links to what we want for our successes, just improving on these challenges.
Great, thank you. Nice job. All right, I think Graham's going to go for table 8. table 9, sorry.
Would you mind standing? And then yep. No, that's okay. All right. So I've been elected to speak for my group. So one of the, as we've heard from a lot of groups, noise is definitely one of the main concerns, but not so much from the vehicles, the trains themselves, but rather from the horns, especially overnight. East-west connections for all modes, and just like emphasizing that there should be a minimal impact on the on biking, pedestrians, and cars by the train. And then we got a lot of comments and thoughts, strongly felt thoughts about the need to simplify a lot of the current connections. Just that there's a very complicated, it sounds like, web of bike lanes, pedestrian pathways, and vehicular channels that are intersecting in a very complicated way at a lot of these stations, and it's an especially large concern our group felt for students, who are a lot of the people biking around. The goals, one of them that came up was a number of times was the improving, basically not only improving the physical connection between different sides of the street, but improving the sense of connectivity between the two different sides of the street, so that there is a feeling that you're not necessarily going from one place to another, but rather you're you feel that you're in the same place. It just happens to be split by that happens to have a train going through it. Minimizing the impact on bikes, pedestrians, and cars would be a goal. And then another comment that we got a lot, that a lot of people felt, or another feeling they felt, was that there's a lot of unsafe driver behavior. A lot of the people proceeding through these spaces themselves as drivers are not doing so in a conscientious way. And so a goal would be to, through whatever means, get people to kind of be more conscious driving through these very complicated intersections. And then, one other goal, kind of similar to our problem, is just safer movement for students and being conscious of the fact that locations near high schools and near schools, they let out a ton of people at once, and so they have very high peaks, and any design needs to take that into account. So I'd say that was our groups.
So our group, basically, in summary, we focused on the 3 at-grade crossings, Churchill, Meadow, and Charleston. That's where all of our dots went. And then, although we listed a lot of specific problems with individual intersections, it just boiled down to bike ped problems getting the most dots, safety getting the second most, and autos and trucks congestion getting the third. The other categories hardly got any at all. We were also concerned about California Avenue, which is in a way part of the Oregon Expressway crossing. We didn't talk about grade separations at all. We were sort of directed to focus on goals rather than the specific solutions at this point. So we had about 10 goals, and going down the list, probably 4 or 5 of them were about bikes and peds. But just summarizing, improved bike ped safety and connectivity across the city, and thereby encouraging bicycle and pedestrian commutes, travel is one goal. Another is, of course, to reduce traffic congestion at intersections, at crossings, and third was the whole issue of train security and safety. And then fourthly, encouraging a process that would include a dedicated stakeholder committee using context-sensitive solutions process. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, Vitor.
So on our table, we had multiple of the points that were already mentioned, but a couple ones that were major and that it was pointed out here too, that were not mentioned at all. And our number one challenge that was very strongly argued for was the outside entities and projects that impact Palo Alto and that might be coming soon and that we have to be prepared for. So entities like and projects like high-speed rail, the influence of Union Pacific Railroad and the Public Utilities Commission have in any of these projects coming through. So having a clear idea what that is and what the impacts will be are our main challenge. Another challenge that we talked about was noise and vibration in traffic that happens and that is very intense near residences and schools, especially because parents tend to, well, people have the choice to take their kids in whichever school they want in Palo Alto. That was a point that was brought up, and that increases traffic and safety issues quite a bit. And another issue was just safety and access for pedestrians, bicyclists, and motorists, because some of the ways and the roads are shared and they're not meant to be, and that's a safety concern. Causes many hazards, and it's very difficult to create a community that is connected and safety connected in that way. For goals, we had, I guess, number one was solutions that are both cost effective and also that reduced taking of homes. We talked a lot about that here. Whatever it's going to happen with high-speed rail or enlarging roads or whatever is going to cause impact on homes, so that cannot be watered down. That needs to be looked at very carefully and estimated very well, and how much it's going to cost, and actually come out in a way that's not just overblown in terms of budget or whatever. Another goal was to have a community that is integrated, not separated, and that is from what the corridors are going to look like, and what the solution, whatever solution comes by, needs to be sourced in terms of material and labor within Palo Alto to help a very wholesome scenario. Who's going to get what, and how Palo Alto can improve from within. And the last thing was just safety solutions that can improve traffic and people's ability to live and enjoy living in Palo Alto. And one solution that was kind of brought up was the greenway, so alongside the tracks have a space for people to walk, bike, and more enjoy the corridor rather than just being scared of whatever trains are going to come by. Try to create an improvement that's better for people. That's about it. Yep.
Great, thank you. Nice job. All right, last table. Table I helped. We were the best table. No, I'm just kidding. All right, Sally.
Okay, I'm Sally Bemis, and we discussed a lot of the same things that I've heard repeated. I think our focus on the biggest challenge was raising the money to get the money that we need to solve this issue, and it was couched in terms of a moonshot, and that we should not be just looking at the Measure B funds, but thinking outside of the box and how we can get that money and dream big. In terms of our green scatter dots, like many of the other tables, our biggest goal was on safety around our children, whether that be the kids biking and walking to school or preventing suicide at our grade crossings. Another thing that we focused on that I don't think I've heard today was the need for correct data, to make sure that we're getting correct data. Some of the discussion earlier today, people are questioning some of the data, and to make sure we have consensus on the data. And finally, I think a lot of discussion today has also been about how we continue this discussion, continue the work that was done today, and whether or not the city plans to have a CAC committee that will bring stakeholders together to continue these conversations. And did I miss some stuff?
Goals now?
Goals. Yeah. One goal we had was minimal parcel taking, which that adds to the financial issues. That the bikes and on the Palo Alto Avenue crossing, to fix the issue with bikes and pedestrians and separate them from the auto traffic. And a common one for all of them was the traffic, with the goal of no traffic backing up in the neighborhoods at all the crossings.
Yeah, at Meadow, Churchill, and Charleston in particular, the traffic backup in the neighborhoods was really flagged as a goal to get that taken care of. Awesome. Good job. Thank you, Sally. Wow, a lot of great input. This was excellent. You guys did a great job. That was so wonderful. So, I truly mean it. All right, so we're done. We're gonna do a little wrap up and we're gonna do the survey again here at the end of the meeting to get a little feedback, and then we'll talk about what the next steps are going forward. So Vitor, can you bring up the survey? This is just to give us some feedback about how this meeting went. We're gonna ask you a few questions about how you want to be communicated with in the future. Yes, you had a question.
I don't need a microphone, but anyway, okay. So what I was saying is this is a regional. At our table, we talked about the regional issue, and I think I heard a couple others mention the regional issue. Obviously, the train runs from Gilroy. The high-speed rail will run all the way from LA to San Francisco. So working regionally, and I really think it's important. I know Jim and Hillary are going to grimace, but I think we need a citizens advisory committee. The nice thing about this is we've got some good goals and things set up already. So that's about a third of a CAC's work anyway. I know it takes a lot of staff time, but it's an important issue, and I'd really strongly recommend that be looked at.
Good point. Yeah, and let me just say that all the, while you may have reported out on just a few goals and challenges, everything you've written down, we're going to take this back and do a summary report. All of this will be put up. We'll put it on the web so you guys can see it and see what other input at other tables and the comprehensiveness of it. A lot of the same questions or thoughts about regionality and how to leverage work that other communities are doing were talked about in my group. So a lot of those themes. So yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of great input that we didn't cover in the report outs that'll be up in the full report minutes of the meeting today. Yes. There. Yeah. Well, we're pulling this up. I'll just give you a little bit more about. So from here going forward. So like I said, we'll take the information today, compile it. All the scatter charts and the notes will be typed up and put up on the web. The presentations you saw earlier today will be put up on the web to see. The next community meeting we plan to have in the fall. We're going to take the input you have here, start to look at different options and alternatives to start comparing them to the challenges and goals that we've set out here. And so in the fall, we'll start to talk to you about some of those issues you talked about, how to prioritize things and get some feedback. So that's all coming in the next series of public meetings this fall. Over the summer, though, you should see information on the city's website. We may do an online survey that asks you various questions about some of this stuff. So there'll be activity happening over the summer as well. May not be meetings like this, but there'll be other ways to participate and have your friends and neighbors also participate in those activities. So if you signed up on our sign-in sheet and gave us your email address, that's a way we'll be able to communicate with you to see if we do surveys, information that's posted on the website. Yes, sir. Right. This is part of that process. The context-sensitive solution, the context is that process involves many parts, and we are committed to following that process. One of those elements isn't always having a stakeholder group, and that's. Okay, I think that's clear feedback for us to think about and talk to the city staff about, decide what we're doing. Great, thank you. Yes, sir.
Well, no, all I wanted to say, I mean, Pat, you would know that Cornerstone is just a consultant here to the city. The council has an established rail committee, which is sort of at a minimum, the clearinghouse for this conversation. And then, of course, as we also know, the rail committee or any subcommittee of the council doesn't have the authority to make decisions for the whole council. So the rail committee, we're going to have to take, it's going to play a key role in all of this we're not just going to put stuff up on the website, for example, and then have a meeting in the fall. So I think the rail committee is really going to have to do its own work in relation to this and make some recommendations to city council. Thanks.
Yes, one more. We'll do the quick survey. Yes, sir. Thank you. That's a good comment. All right. If you get your smartphone out and go back to sift.ly. Remember the participant code is connecting Palo Alto. Sorry. And you should, when you get on there, you'll see this question: can we count on your participation in the next workshop? And it looks like we got a lot of yeses, which is excellent. Who doesn't want it? Well, who's that? Raise your hand. All right. Now I said that and somebody else jumped on the bandwagon. They didn't want to participate. All right. All right. All right, next question. All right, rank for us the 3 best ways to keep you engaged in this process. So you should see up the questions in just a second. There we go. Email, web, social media, text, mailers, phone calls. Nobody wants to get called at home. See, look at that. I like the mailers. People still like to get stuff in the mailbox. I like, yep. All right, this is really helpful, you guys, because we are looking at what's the most effective way to get you info. So as expected, emails up there, but it's good to see mailers is an important piece of that as well. So it's good. Yes, sir. Well, yeah, email. Well, so if you want stuff to come to you in the mail, you should do mailers. So that top one is to get updates or newsletter information via email. Yes. Next door would be social media. That was the question. Yes. All right. Next question. How often would you like to be contacted with updates? Every hour, on the hour? Every 5 minutes? No. Monthly, bi-weekly? Every 3 months, or only at key milestones? This gives a sense of how really engaged you are. Very good. Monthly, that looks, yeah, that's monthly updates is pretty typical. That's good. What was that? Every 20 minutes? Every train. That you look up Caltrain for that schedule. That's their schedule. That's not here. That's yeah, so monthly, it looks like monthly is the top pick, bi-weekly, only at key milestones, and then every 3 months. That's not enough, according to this group. Yeah. All right, next question. Is that it? That's the last one. You did well. You did great. Everybody give yourselves a hand. Thank you. All right, so we're done. There's a...
Let me say one thing.
Oh, yeah, Jim.
No, just real quickly, on behalf of the city staff and more importantly the council, we do want to thank you all for spending really 4 hours here on a Saturday. Those of you who track this issue, who follow this issue very closely, this week's rail committee meeting, which would normally be on Wednesdays, needs to be rescheduled due to some conflicts. So that we'll give you the update on when that will be, but no rail committee meeting this week. So thanks again.
All right. Yes, and there is still lots of sandwiches in the back. Please help us eat that food up so it doesn't go to waste. And thank you very much. Have a great rest of the afternoon and a great weekend, everybody. So you can hand those in.